Hello guys, this is Lucas again, and in this video I'm going to show you how to create another object, another model, and make them make those two, so the one that we created in the previous video and the new one, talk to each other. So the new object that we're going to create, or new model, let's call it a user, because most of our applications will have some sort of user. So let's create one here as well. So Rails generate model, and we call this model user, and we'll give this user some attributes. So let's give him name, and that will be a string. Let's give him email. Most users will use emails, and that's gonna also be a string. And that's probably it for now. I think it's enough to have an email and a name. So let's run that, and that should create 3 files, just like the generator before when we were creating post. Now we should create exactly the same set of files. So migration file to update our database, our model to define all the abilities of our new model, and the test file. So let's make sure that our migration looks okay. Okay, we'll create table users, and there will be 2 fields, name and password, name and email. Also this timestamps where it was created and updated, and by default the Rails will also create ID. So the migration looks okay, so we can run it and update our database. Rake db migrate, and rake db test prepare, because we don't have, there are 2 different databases. The one that we interact through our application or from the Ruby console is something we call a development database. The other database that we use for test is slightly different. Every time we run the test, after it's finished, the data is all cleared. And in the development database, it's not. So all the posts that we created before, they're still gonna be there in this, after we restart the computer, because they're permanent. The test database is separate, and it's cleared after each test suite is run. So we have to make sure the migration is done for both development and test database, and this is command to make sure that database for test is also up to date. Rake db test prepare. Now we can run our spec. And similar to the situation before, we have pending test. We can now close the migration files and open the test file for user spec, and delete this line. Now, probably the best first step is to create some tests in order to make sure that the record of the user is valid and is useful for us to use in our application. Same as before, we can create, at the beginning of our test suite, we can create an object that we're going to test. And similar to the situation before the post, we can create instance variable, call it a user, and we'll use the class method on user class new, and we give our new user name, and that name will be, let's say, John Small. It's a good friend of mine. And let's give it an email. John at example.com. By the way, this is a good practice when you want to test something and there is some email involved. always use example as domain. It's used for this purpose. It's used for testing. So if you ever send email to somebody at example.com, it's not gonna go anywhere. It's gonna be it's for testing. So no one's gonna see this email. It can be used. Whereas if you say John at gmail.com and you accidentally send that email, it will probably go to some John. Okay. And why it tells us my IDE is telling me that there is some error here. Oh yes, I know. Because we didn't write before. Well, okay, that's the proper syntax. So before, and we create our instance variable. And we can now set the subject. User, so we can refer later to that subject. And probably we want to say that should be valid. Be underscore valid. So this by default should be okay. So this is what we're checking here, that this is meeting the criteria I'm gonna set. It should respond to name. Actually, we don't need that. It's too generic. So let's save this and see if our test is passing. And it's passing. And now we probably want to make sure that user without the name or email cannot be saved. So we want to decline all the requests where somebody wants to save user without the name or password. So we can now write the test to make sure that this functionality will work. Describe when user has no name. Before, our user name we will set to nil. So we override John Small, and in this test our John Small becomes nobody. It should not be valid. Save and run the test. And it's failing because at the moment we can save user without the name. Exactly same way as before. To make this test pass, we need to add validator that will prevent user without the name from being saved. Validates name presence true. We can save that and run our spec again. And the test now passes. Another test that we want to write is probably when the email is not present. Before our user email, we will set to nil, and we would expect they will not be valid. Can save that and run our spec. And in the meantime, we can go to our user and start writing our validator to make it pass. Validates email. True. You may want to also write some tests to make sure that the length of each name and password is correct, not too short and not too small. And there is even more tests that you can write to ensure that the email is correct format. So for example, it has the @ symbol, doesn't have spaces, etc., etc. You can search the internet for that, how to validate the proper format in Rails. We're not going to do it right now, but feel free to expand your validations. Write your test first to make sure that you have your input and you expect it to be either valid or invalid. Alright, so we created a new object. Now we have user and post models, and we want to be able to give our user superpower. We want to be user to be able to create posts and make them his own. And during the class, I used the example when you own the book, sometimes you may want to put your mark inside that book, so everybody knows this is your book and it belongs to you. And when you borrow this book to your friend, at some point you may go to his place and you find your book and you open it and you see, oh, this is my book. And then databases, in relational databases like the one we're using here, this is the way to mark the ownership, because our objects, our models one can own the other one. So what we want is the user to be able to create objects or create posts, and we can also find all the posts that belong to that user. So right now all the posts are anonymous. They have no way to mark them. And the first thing that we're going to do is to mark each post with the user ID. So let's go to our post spec and type this very, very short test that it should respond to user ID. So now when we save the post, we also wanted to have this attribute of user ID. This is where we're going to put the mark. This is where we're going to say, oh, this post belongs to user number 1 or maybe user number 2. Let's save this and run our spec and to see if the post is responding to user ID or not. If it knows what user ID is or it doesn't know. And as you can probably guess, right now it doesn't know because we never defined it. Yeah, it doesn't know. So let's add this user ID to our post model in our database. We have to do it by running migration to create one of those files. Okay, those that were created with our model. We need to create a new one because every time we want to change the database, we need a way to pass the instructions to our database. So you can run it by typing Rails generate migration, and now we call our migration add user ID to posts. And to some extent what we write here is we can write anything we want, but we want to make it descriptive and also the Rails is able to pick up some information from this description. So for example, right now we'll guess that we're talking about posts. So Rails generate migration, add user to posts, and we can say already what fields we want to add to our posts. We want to add user ID, and that user ID will be in an integer. And run that. That created a new migration file. You can already see it in your migrate folder. This is the one on the bottom. And there is some instructions inside. It says add column posts. So we add column to a posts table, and that column will have a name of user ID and it's going to be integer. We can add things here, and we can change this migration file before we execute it. So we can say add column to posts table. We can add some other column. I don't know, maybe it's really hard for me to think what posts can also have. But you can probably say title. Okay, and title could be string. But right now we really don't need that. So let's save as it was and run our migration. Break db migrate. Break db test prepare. And once that's done, we can run our test again and see if this failed test will not pass. And it does pass, which means that our post now knows that it has user ID. So how about we make our user be able to own many posts and create them? So let's at the beginning, let's make sure that our user knows what the post is. So it respond to posts, and we say posts is as opposed to post because we want to make sure that our user will respond to many posts. Okay, you can save that and run the spec, and the test fails because our user doesn't know what posts are. And how we're going to fix it is to go back to our user.rb, our model, and let's type that the user has many posts. Sorry, not user has many posts. Okay, let's save that. And this simple instruction here now gave our user superpower. This instruction here will let our user create posts and own them, and then find all the posts that belong to that user in our database. At the same time, we can go to our post and say that it belongs to a user. And then we can also find the user that owns this post. So belongs to user. We can save that and try to run our spec again. and it now passes. To show you an example how this works, let's go to our command. And first of all, let's restart, make sure that we start with current code. And we can begin by creating a user, and we'll save it to the local variable. So user, or maybe let's say John, because we can call our variables any way we want, and we'll save into that variable the new user. So we'll create new user and we give it name, and we give that name John, and email john@example.com. Okay, that the transaction has been successful, so our user now is in the database. It has ID number 1. And now, because our user can own many posts, we can use that ability and create posts through the object of the user. So we can say John, because that's the instance variable we have used, posts, and we use a plural version of posts, create, and the content of the post will be, this is my first post here, and you put the signature here, close parenthesis, and that created our post. And this is the record. So let's read it. So it will have ID 7. It has the content. This is my first post here. Created that, updated that, and now it has also user ID. And look, it has exactly the same ID as our John. Now we can also find all the posts that belong to John by typing John posts, or just type posts. Oh, sorry, we had this command before, so I've pressed something before. Okay, now that works fine. So we can say John posts, and now return the post. Now, right now it returns something that we call an array, but right now there is only one post here. So we can count how many posts does John have. John posts count. It has only one post. And we can count all the posts that are ever created by typing post, as this is our class, count. And we have 7 posts. So all posts that we have in the database, there is 7 of them, but only one belongs to John. Only one has this field user ID with the value of 1. Alright, so let's create another user and make sure that we can create those posts and we can assign them to one user or the other. So create new user, count, not count, create. It's really late now, so give it a name. All right, and we will use this new user to create his own post. Post create content. It's very late. Great. And I created post number 8, and it belongs to user number 2. We can find that post by saying user posts first. We can type that and we'll find the first post. All right, there is it. There it is. It says it is very late. We can probably test that. What we want is to every post ever created to belong to some user. We don't want those anonymous tests. We can probably write the test for it to make sure that every post will have the stamp, will have this identification of the user. Go back to our post spec, and we write new test. When user ID is not present, do before at post user ID equals nil, and that should not be valid. It should not be valid. Save and run our spec. I know it's gonna fail because right now there is no validation checking that the post would have user ID every single time. But let's wait until it fails, which takes incredibly long on my machine these days. And it didn't fail. Did we save our test? Well, we did. How come? Let's try to create our our post from here. Post create. Oh, we have to restart our command line in order to pick up all the changes. Okay. And we create the post. And it did work, so there is something wrong about our test. Oh yes, of course. Well, first of all, our content is too short. So our content it's not passing validations because we created our post. Our prototype post will have content will be too short. Actually, we can test that too, which we should have done at the beginning, to be honest. So we should say it should be valid, and we save that, and this will check if this is already meeting the criteria, that we starting with the proper, let's call it a prototype. And yes, it does not pass because it needs at least 20 characters. Great, so with that in place, let's fix this prototype so we can fail it somewhere else. Save that, and now our new test should be failing. Great. So now our post without user ID is valid, so we want to make it invalid. So it cannot be saved without user ID. And we do it exactly the same way as before, and we will validate user ID for presence. Save, go back and run our spec. And that will make the first test pass, but now some other tests would not pass, because the first test here, it should be valid. Now it won't be valid because here we don't add any user ID. Okay? And therefore all the other posts would also not be valid, but not because they're too short, but because they lack user ID. So our prototype post is invalid to start with. So let's fix that. Instead of using our class to create new posts, we'll use our user to create new posts. And so our before block will have more to it. So we have to kind of split this in multiple lines, and we create our user first. So we create user, and then we will use that user to create the post that will belong to him. User is user create, and we give him name John, email @.com, and here we'll change the syntax to the one that we used in the console before. @user posts create, and then we give it content as before. Let's save this and run our spec one more time. And this time all tests are passing. From now on, the post can only be created by user. It cannot be anonymously created. Only user can create posts. I think that's it for now. In the next video, I'll try to show you how we can print those posts and users, their names in our views. But as for the model, I think this is a good beginning for you to practice. So try to create a couple new models, run the migrations, add new fields. Maybe you want to create a model that says it's a book, or it's a hotel, or it's a city, etc., etc. Make them talk to each other and try to create, user can create books, or user can create hotels, and make them own one another and write some tests, just like you did here. Thank you very much, and I see you in the next video.